Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much. This is a nice group of people. So I had this idea that there are so many new poetry books coming out all the time that those of us with books that are a little bit older, and by older, I don't mean very old,
Mm.
um, but they tend to get lost a little bit in the new poetry shuffle. And of course, there were pandemic books that came out. Apparently, I attended a writers' conference, and apparently the publishers, not just poetry publishers, but fiction publishers, et cetera, were just inundated with these pandemic books because people were home and they had time to write. So anyway, my point is a lot of poetry books have come out, and we needed to give our little bit older books a second chance for a reading, because probably a lot of us did readings when our books first came out, and then kind of fades away a little bit. So we wanted to revisit the Terrapin Poets. We all have books between 2016 and 2018. And so there were going to be 5 of us tonight. Unfortunately, I messed up because I'm not a Zoom expert, and I had settings that were for the US only. And Lynn Knight is in British Columbia. So I feel really bad about that. We actually changed the setting, but she couldn't get in. And so we're going to do a part 2 with some other Terrapin poets, and we'll include her then. So she says hi to everyone, and she's very sorry for missing it. So Diane Lockward, our wonderful publisher with Terrapin Books, is here tonight. Just want to say hi, Diane, and thank you so much for believing in us. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Okay, so each of us is going to read for 8 minutes, and now there's only going to be 4 of us, so we'll have a little bit more time for the Q&A at the end. So I'll ask everybody to mute except for the person who is reading. And then at the end, we can sort of, raise hands or.
The front door is locked, I think.
I think as host, I can go ahead and mute everybody too. We've got 21 people on for those of you who can't see everyone, and that's just wonderful. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute all, but then Kory, I'll introduce you and you can unmute after I'm done introducing you. Okay. All right, and so Kory Wells is our first reader, and her book with Terrapin was released in 2019. It's called Sugar Fix, which is such a cool title. She also has a chapbook called Heaven Was the Moon, and that's from March Street Press. Her writing has been featured on the Slow Down podcast, which is a wonderful podcast. If you haven't heard it, you should get the daily email. And her work also recently appears in The Strategic Poet, which is one of Diane Lockward's and Terrapin Books' fabulous craft books, The Literary Bohemian, and Podunk Review, which is a wonderful, wonderful name. And she's been published other places as well. She's a former software developer who now nurtures connection and community through the arts, storytelling, and advocacy. She also mentors poets across the nation through the From Home program MTSU Write. She is a 7th generation Tennessean and has served as the poet laureate of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where she founded and co-manages a reading and open mic series. So Kory, take it away.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for organizing us. And again, I'm so glad to see some friends on, whether you are local area or far-flung. I'm glad to see you. And yes, I think for David and I know our books came out kind of in the fall of 2019. And so, I got to have some readings and a local party, and so that was great. But I felt like there was going to be a lot more coming in 2020, and then of course it didn't. So I'm really appreciative of the chance to share a few poems with y'all. So Sugar Fix, and I'm like David, I'm terrible at doing this, but hopefully you can see it's got a cake on the front. And it is all about the sugar, but sugar being a metaphor in some cases for love and romance, but also as a vehicle for me talking about my family and memory. And this book came out of this intersection of genealogy and DNA and kind of trying to square that information with the oral history that I grew up with. I grew up in a strong storytelling tradition. And then also just with our present times and how does all that fit together? So this poem, which is near the beginning, tells this story of summers with my grandmother, who I called Mamaw. It's called Untold Story. She was religious about reading aloud. Ann Lander's advice in the Free Press, Jell-O salad recipes in Good Housekeeping, letters and postcards from cousins, and one odd relation all the way in Australia. But neither of us ever said a word about the National Enquirer, which she'd pick up in the Winn-Dixie checkout next to the gum and chocolate bars, as if it were essential as milk and sugar. Back from the grocery on a summer afternoon, she'd start supper and I'd slip away to the overwarm sanctuary of her modest living room. Thin floral carpet, knotty pine walls, and a nubby mauve sofa where I, a sensitive and impressionable child, would spread the tabloid and kneel before it to absorb cover to cover and back again until my knees ached, the gospel of my disbelief. A moon landing hoax, an alien abduction, a two-headed motherless kitten nursing a domesticated squirrel, and of course, the secret lives of stars. What is it that makes us want to swallow a story whole? To think only one version can be true. We were not true disciples, but my grandmother tended the altar of narrative possibilities. This woman with an 8th grade education who I never saw reading a book. So that's Mamaw. And my mother would have you know that my Mamaw did read books, but of course she didn't have time when I was staying with her in the summertime. But really, she did only have an 8th grade education and yet was quite a writer herself, a philosopher, and definitely a storyteller. So I grew up with all these stories of being descended from Native Americans, which is not unusual for those of us in the South and perhaps in other areas of the country as well. But as I, again, started doing more genealogy and trying to figure out what really was true, I was super interested to find various, records, such as the 9th United States Census, June 18th, 1870, Macon County, North Carolina. And the data in this census refers to Willis Guy, who is a great-great-great-grandfather. And I imagine exactly how this might have gone down, if you will, the census taker coming around. And I think the rest of the poem tells the story. This is called The Assistant Marshal Makes an Error in Judgment. Even though he has read and reread best he can the instructions sent direct from Washington, even though he employs a sturdy portable inkstand, quality ink he blots dry with unpracticed diligence on strictly confidential wide white sheets. Even though important scientific results depend upon his questionable R's and too short L's, tedious recording of name, age, occupation, and color. Assistant Marshal J.T. Reeves, who some call carpetbagger, now sits amiably on the porch with one Willis Guy, farmer, age 59. And reads back to Mr. Guy all he has written, so mistakes may be corrected on the spot. The marshal is not from around these parts, and Mr. Guy, previously known as mulatto, previous to that known as free colored person, if asked, would claim Catawba, Cherokee, even the dark Portuguese, but figures it best to keep his silence as the government man's ditto of column 6. Like that, Mr. Guy and all his kin become white. Mr. Guy would admit he isn't as good at letters as his children, but squinting sideways at the marshal's ledger, he knows the unmistakable difference between W and M. So that really is this moment in history that that particular branch of my family went from some sort of always not white designation in all the previous years of census, that I've been able to find them, and suddenly they become white. And my theory is that the census taker was not from around there and they appeared white, and so he just wrote that down. Who knows? One more poem that I'll close with is, of course, this idea, as I mentioned before, sugar isn't just family stories. Sugar is also romance and love. And so this one, David was kind enough to share on Verse Virtual this past week. And it's really one of my favorites to read because it's this character. I don't know who this woman is, but she came to me once and told me this little story. And the title just goes right into the poem. So I'll just read. He drove a 4-door Chevy, nothing sexy, but I'd been thinking of his mouth for weeks when he finally called me up and asked if I'd like to get some ice cream. I was full from supper and my thighs sure didn't need it, but I've never struggled with priorities. That Dairy Queen had gone downhill even then. Bright red logo faded like a movie star who's kissed away all her lipstick. But it still had a drive-in, and he knew how I was about nostalgia and sugar. This is how a place became our song. We parked under the sun-bleached canopy, and I leaned over him, pretending to read the menu. Then at his rolled-down window, we confessed our desires more or less into thin air, which now that I think about it, sounds a little like church. And believe you me, I've been praying about him, how I wanted him, how if I couldn't have him, I wanted to be free of want. Do you get that way sometimes? Where all you can think about is chocolate, chocolate, chocolate. Or in my case, man, that man. The bench seat of his Chevy became a pew, the space between us palpable as the early summer humidity. I kept telling myself, it's just an ice cream. But even then, I knew love is a kind of ruin. When those cones arrived so thick and voluptuous, I almost blushed to open my mouth before him, expose my eager tongue. Oh, thank you all so much. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the rest of our poets this evening.
Thank you so much, Kory. That was wonderful. Anne wrote in the chat, love hearing that Southern accent, fellow Southerner. And I'm sitting here in the South, but I'm from Michigan originally, hoping that I've lost a little bit of my Michigan accent, but also I got over COVID the last week. And so my nose is still very stuffy. And so I probably have an even more nasally voice than normal. But Kory, that was an excellent reading. Thank you so much. And we've got David next. So David Graham, his Terrapin book is his most recent of 7 collections of poetry. And his book is titled The Honey of Earth, published by Terrapin in 2019. He co-edited with Tom Montag the anthology Local News, poetry about small towns, and with Kate Sontag, the essay anthology After Confession, Poetry as Confession. He's been a faculty member several times at the Frost Place in Franconia, New Hampshire, where he also served as poet in residence in 1996. In 2016, he retired from teaching at Ripon College, where he also directed the Visiting Writers Series for 28 years. He's currently a contributing editor of the online journal Verse Virtual, and he also writes a column, Poetic License. He lives in Glen Falls, New York, and his website is davidgrahampoet.com. So David, please read for us.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you all for being here. And special thanks for Diane Lockward, who's the Terrapin, den mother, and the reason we are all gathered today. Very, very grateful to her. Wave at me or something if my volume isn't high enough, please. Given our time constraints, I thought I would read some of the, just a tiny handful of the shorter poems from The Honey of Earth. And if you don't know the reference, this is kind of my elevator pitch, I guess, for the book. The Honey of Earth makes reference to a passage in Wallace Stevens, which I've always loved, and I had the title long before I had the book. I knew I wanted to use it. The Stevens lines go, "The honey of heaven may or may not come, but that of earth both comes and goes at once." And the book has a number of topics, a number of themes, but I hope they all kind of circle around that tension that you see in that Stevens quote of the heavenly and the earthly, and the sorrowful and the joyful, and so forth, the bitter and the sweet. I love the fact that Kory and I both have sugar-related titles in the same year. Anyway, I'm going to start with an elegy for my mother, which is quite obvious, the bittersweetness of that. And interestingly, I started it long before she died, because she went through a very long decline, first physical and then eventually mental. And so I had a lot of time to sort of deal with what was happening poetically, I guess, which I suppose is how I deal with many things. Anyway, this is in two parts, and it's one of my favorites from the book. The first part is a sort of portrait of my mother as I knew her and imagined her, and the second part is self-explanatory, but it takes up where her mental issues started to become apparent. Part 1, Vinegar and Fizz. My mother could not be trusted to tell it straight. She adored welshing on a bet, spinning tales, splashing in Hyperbole's lake, relished a circus, the bellow and roar, musk and glitter, bananas vanishing down clown pants in cheap yellow air. First in line for the freak show, dazzled by carny patter, never met a dog or horse she didn't love. Children, maybe yes, maybe no. She spoke other languages when possible, applied pressure to a bleeding wound, plucked floundering toddlers out of the deep end, getting her good house dress soaked. You wanted her around in an emergency. But what an unreliable witness. She told it slant, but never all. Couldn't tell it straight, I think. But when have facts ever been the point of any tale? Don't bet against her, friend. Did her many balloons wobble brightly to the ceiling? Yes. Did she place a single peanut on my pudgy palm for the elephant to lift with its trunk? Of course. A touch still zapping me 60 years later. My mother would never turn away from any elephant, juggler, parade, song, or barker beating his drum of gorgeous lies. And part 2. The doctor settles opposite her in a straight chair, looking kindly and earnest, and I can tell what's coming. He asks her name, and of course she snorts, "You know that." Yes, he does. But then he inquires if she can say what season. She looks around the ward craftily. Decorated tree, tinsel, cartoon snowflakes stuck to the windows. And my, excuse me, my timer just fell off. Uh, where was I? Decorated tree, tinsel, cartoon snowflakes stuck to the windows. It's almost Christmas. What are you getting me? Next, he wonders if she knows the year. She glares into his face, allows a sullen pause. Then, 1937, she says. And so it is. She's going on 16, a girl ready to burn and roam. Nobody's fool, a spitfire, all vinegar and fizz. The war is but a vague mist on the horizon. This year has a gleaming, sun-scoured sound, 1937. The train is about to leave the station for the one and only time. She'll be damned if she won't be on it, and if she won't be on it and ride far from home. So that's my mother. Second poem I'll read is one of those out of the blue poems. I don't know exactly where it came from or how, but I know what triggered it, which was a swap I was having 1 month with a former student of mine. In April, we used to swap poems one a day. And for some reason, this came out. It's called Listening for Your Name. As a father steals into his child's half-lit bedroom, slowly, quietly, standing long and long, counting the breaths before finally slipping back out, taking care not to wake her. And as that night-lit child is fully awake the whole time, with closed eyes, measured breathing, savoring a delicious blessing she couldn't name but will remember her whole life. How often we feel we're being watched over, or that we're secretly looking in on the ones we love, even when they are far away, or even as they are lost in the sleep no one wakes from. What we know and what we feel can fully coincide, like love and worry, like taking care in full silence and secrecy, like darkness and light together. And I'll conclude with a different take on the heavenly earthly tension. A number of years ago, I was on the Ohio Turnpike, and hand painted on the side of a panel truck was this question: how would Jesus drive? And it was a long trip from Wisconsin to upstate New York, and so I had a lot of time to think about that, and it seemed a very good question. So here's how would Jesus drive? Well, there would be no road rage, that's for sure. Smoothly shifting down the entrance ramps, never hogging the passing lane or driving 20 miles with his left blinker on. He would wave joyfully to kids and passing cars. He would leave clear, dry road behind, even in the worst sleet storm or blizzard. In truth, he would be a bit of a pain in the butt, lingering forever at intersections, letting others go first, stopping motorists to alert them to better driving techniques, announcing to the big rig drivers at the truck stop that they should all abandon their loads immediately, pile in his van for the long haul to salvation, leaving those 18-wheelers with empty cabs in the parking lot, rumbling as they spew diesel exhaust into the sinful air, all their cargoes of milk or oranges slowly going bad. Thank you very much.
David, thank you. That was a really great selection, very well read. And make sure you note in the chat, some people have commented. So I'm going to turn the program over to Kory since I'm the next reader and she's going to introduce me.
Yes. So our lovely host tonight, Karen Paul Holmes, has two poetry books, No Such Thing as Distance from Terrapin in 2018, and also Untying the Knot from Aldrich Press in 2014. Her poems have been featured on the Writer's Almanac and also the Slowdown, and she was named a Best Emerging Poet by Stay Thirsty Media. Publications of Karen's include Diode, Valparaiso Review, Verse Daily, and Prairie Schooner. She founded and hosts the Side Door Poets and a monthly reading with an open mic. She's also currently the Tweet Speak Poet Laura, which I think I'm going to have questions about later, Karen. Of No Such Thing as Distance, poet David Kirby writes, like a circus aerialist who makes us gasp one moment and laugh the next, the poet takes us from her immigrant father's Macedonian roots to her own maturity, to the life of a woman who is smart and well-read, yet knows her way around a Coney Island hot dog and finds the attentions of a drunk cowboy oddly flattering. So with that tease, we're going to hear from Karen.
Thank you, Kory. That David Kirby is something else. If you know his poetry, or if you don't know his poetry, you should look him up. So yes, my book, No Such Thing as Distance. And it's largely family poems. Like David Kirby said in the little blurb, that my father was from Macedonia, my mother was from Australia, and they met in Australia when he was in the service and moved to the US and had the family. And I grew up in Michigan. So there's a lot of poems about my Macedonian culture, a lot of travel poems, and food poems. So there's even recipes in the back of the book. The first one I'm going to read, actually, I'm going to read two poems in which my parents die, and then I'm going to read, I'm going to end up with a funny poem, so it won't be all sad. Death prefers blondes. There was a wig mix-up at the funeral home. We had a chance to switch back to the gray bob. It had suited Mother for doctors and church those last few months. But we knew she'd rather dazzle everyone from her casket as a stylish ash blonde. She looked 70, not 87, with the wrong, longer hair and undertaker's makeup that reshaped her grown gaunt cheekbones into Faye Dunaways. One catty mourner hissed, "It doesn't look a thing like her." A boon to us, easier to let that blonde descend into Madame Tussauds museum, while our real mother joined us in prayers, carried on wisps of frankincense past the gold dome of St. Nicholas. And that was a Russian Orthodox church in Flint, Michigan. And the next poem is going to reference some church traditions also. This is my father's story. He was born in 1911 in what was then Macedonia. To my father, man with three names. Greece took your village of Buf in 1912, forced Macedonians to speak Greek, to change their names, yours from Constantine Papazov to Costa Papas. You left for the new world, a teenager with your father, but not your mother. Never saw her again until someone sent a photo of her in a coffin. In 28, Ellis Island declared you Karl Paul. Your people clustered in Michigan, formed Orthodox churches. We celebrated name days. May your name last forever. And on Easter, dyed eggs red for his blood, shouted, Christos voskres, Christ is risen. You walked me to that gilded altar. I took my husband's name, practiced my new signature over and over. But Dad, I want you to know your granddaughter embraces her 1/4 you. Now goes by Katya instead of Catherine. Remember Father Raphael baptizing her, a new servant of God, tiny and naked, anointed with oil, immersed in the font. She came up laughing. Before she matured, we buried you. Once again, Konstantin Papazov held candles for you, sang Vaishnaya, memory eternal, incense rising. We still make quiche like Zelnik, still dance the Macedonia and Payadushko at church picnics with 8 to 80-year-olds. Katya and I feel the Balkan rhythms in our blood. When the clarinet wails, we know the tempo is about to double. And now my sister, who's on the call, is probably in tears because she's very sentimental about these family poems. So I appreciate her listening. I'm going to read a short poem, 14 lines, actually sort of sonnet-like. All of my, my poems tend to tell stories, but this is more like a moment, quiet moment poem. Coming to. Before sunrise, awake but not quite, under cotton she lies, listening to the breath's hollow music, the almost snore from the small terrier in a chair, the andante of her beloved's inhaling, exhaling, and she knows her grown daughter hasn't stirred, no creaks or bumps from the guest room above, nor has the dog who guards the kitchen window, his bark not roused by the street's kindling trills. And so she floats in and out of gauzy prayer, her gratitude mantra for this quiet, for those still sleeping here or elsewhere, for those who gave her breath, whose death rattles she was spared, who gave her this capacity to love, this awareness of being safe, being here, drawing in the same air. And I'm going to end with a funny poem. At least, you know, it's dangerous to call it a funny poem because everybody has their own idea of funny. But, you know, I think it's kind of funny. And we're having a carpenter ant problem right now, which is what this poem is about. And so I kind of learned something from this experience in the poem that I can apply now. Ant Fest. Drunk on liquid bait, ants stumble across the white bathroom tile. Some use the tub as a skateboarder's half pipe. Some lose their segments, the floor sprinkled with jet beads like the time mom's necklace broke. 3 ants tumble in a tangled ball. Jesus, a menage a trois? Instructions warn of a feeding frenzy. Don't intrude. Bait, wait, eliminate. Give ants a chance to take the elixir back to their queen. I wait. 2 weeks. Their Woodstock rages on. Can't let these anti-carpenters, little antichrists destroy my house, one mouthful of sawdust at a time. My trigger finger itches, but I obey. Do not use killing spray. I restock. Think like an ant. Stuff bait in crannies. More staggering everywhere. Stick legs get stuck in carpet. 2 lovers discover my bed. I search Q&As online. Nothing speaks of this debauchery. I call. The rep has a ready reply. Oh, it won't work on carpenter ants. They drink, but don't feed the colony. Not giving up that easy, I quote the box. Kills all household ants. She spews the corporate line. Carpenters aren't household ants. Now I'm whining, seeking some sign I'm not stupid. But the picture looks like these, shiny, black, large. Her weary voice, human now. Right, we've sent memos to marketing. My frenzy begins, all the frustrations I've ever had. My home-wrecking ex, a big VP soul-sucking job, cheerleading tryouts in 11th grade, squash, spray, flush. Thank you.
Karen, that's so fun. And yeah, right. Don't we all identify with that last it's woman versus nature, right? That's so much fun. So I'll let you.
People versus ants.
Yes.
Thank you, Kory. Thanks for the nice introduction. And we just have one more poet for any of you who joined us late. Unfortunately, we are missing Lynn Knight, who is calling in from Canada, and I didn't realize that the Zoom settings were preventing from people from other countries. I don't know if anyone else from Canada or elsewhere tried to get in, so I'm really sorry. But we will pick up Lynn next time when we do a second Terrapin Poets reading. So now we have Paige Riehl, and she is the author of the poetry collection Suspension from Terrapin Books in 2018. And she's also written a poetry chapbook, Blood Ties, and that's Finishing Line Press 2014. Her poetry has appeared in numerous publications such as Artful Dodge, Crab Orchard Review, Waterstone Review, Portland Review, and Meridian. She was a finalist for the 2017 Lindquist and Venom Prize for Poetry and winner of the Loft Mentor Series in Poetry. She served for many years as poetry editor of Midway Journal and as a volunteer poetry mentor for the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. She earned her MA in English from North Dakota State University and her MFA in creative writing with a focus in poetry from Hamline University. She's an English faculty member at Anoka Ramsey Community College, and her website is paigeriehl.com. That's PAIGERIEHL.com. Paige, welcome to our reading. Can't wait to hear your poems.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Karen for organizing this. She really took the lead and got us all together and got the word out. So I greatly appreciate that. And thank you to Diane as well, because we all wouldn't be here without her. And her careful hand helped craft this book into what it became and helped me pick a title, Suspension, which relates to some of the themes in the book. There are a lot of poems in the book about kind of existing in these liminal spaces when you know something is going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And several of the poems in my book deal with the waiting period when my husband and I were in the process of adopting our daughter. And at the same time, my very beloved grandmother was declining. So there was this waiting for both joy and grief that we knew were going to come. So I'm going to open with the opening poem from Suspension. And this is a poem that I wrote as kind of a response to questions about that people would ask us about why we chose to adopt and how and when the adoption idea came and the process began. And it was always, there were such hard questions to answer. International adoption story. It didn't begin with her crowning, the sweating, purple blue burst through portal, the head of black hair, the arm reaching outward. It didn't begin with despair, or did it? Sign here, 3 shaking pairs of hands in 2 countries, icebergs between them. Exacting is hard. The compass slips. The pencil tip breaks. Perhaps it began further back, the loving in dark beds, salt saturated with hope. No, before that must have been glimpses and glances, hearts carried in pockets and rubbed raw. Our beginning is not even the winter day our baby's unborn heart just stopped. walk back through the brambles of family, climb through my own blood tree and the sown-on branch. The non-blood me adopted too, but that's not when, not really. Who's beginning? Hers? Ours? We are all wound tight, loved and replayed, then stuck, forced, and unfurled. And I am standing here at this dinner party with the taste of dirt in my mouth. Everyone waits for the answer. So I'm gonna shift gears here. Another thing that repeats itself throughout the book is travel. And I think traveling is like a liminal state when you're moving between countries and time zones and experiences. And so I just returned on Friday. I'm still a little jet lagged from a trip to Croatia. And I thought, oh, I have to read this poem because I was just swimming in the Adriatic. So this is called Restraint. The guide warns us not to touch a fragile coral, urges restraint. That first leap into the salt, the clear sea, the flash of fear for what swims beneath. My flippered feet are clumsy, my breathing stertorous. Beside me, lovers hold hands and float, their bodies like starfish spread on the water's surface. Beneath is silence and gentle movement, stoplight parrotfish, blue tang and stingray. I float with the current, short-sighted in the blue kaleidoscope. Can anyone help but hear the thumping heartbeat when, head finally lifted to summer air, the sea suddenly so vast, the white boat and other snorkelers are just glittering specks windward? The sea urchins have gathered below upon the coral, their spikes inches from my belly. Float carefully in this liminal space. This must be what it's like, the moment right before what could, what might be, before the shrill whistle and an arm waving us all in. So I'm giving you a wide range taste here of what's in the book. This is a lost love poem. And, thanks to my husband who puts up with these sorts of poems and gives me feedback. So this is called The Dreaming Woman. You are not an injured angel, side bleeding, not a muscled demon, finger curled, just a man who had the beautiful hands of Jesus. Oh, anti-miracle, oh, blind hunger, what freedom is a yesterday unfinished? In my mind, we become two swirling insects. I impale myself on these thoughts, as if the act of thrusting myself on your memory would force you from my blood, my cells. Forgetting is spinning the globe backwards. I pile the memory pieces of you on a plate. The dishwasher won't close, the water is cold. 15 years and I'm translated into an unknown language. 15 years and the water that touched our hips has circled the globe. It waits for us near Malaga. Do you taste older? A certain shade of gold? Gold pears, cheese gold with the rind of living? I hid your picture years ago, and now the shoebox is empty. Somewhere a branch brushes your shoulder. Under moonlight, a tree drops her dampness on your cheek. The morning sun, you are lost to me, a chair thrown in the ocean. I am a series of intentional accidents. Each day is a dry pine needle. I am filling myself with old tickets and olives and outdated calendars. Sometimes I lie with my cheek against hardwood. There is breathing in the wood. It enters me like a splinter. I would not misplace you again, would label your neck in black felt tip. And my last poem, I felt I had to read this one because right before our reading here, I sent my daughter out into the front yard to chase away a rabbit because they are always eating my flowers. So I think they're cute, but I have a kind of hate relationship with rabbits. This is called The Rabbit is Unafraid. Our pale bird arms, our slender feet announce themselves delicately. Those first unadorned spring steps. Body parts unlayered, bellies loose and smooth, patient like the rabbit, somehow fat after winter, full of every green only recently peeped from the black. He moves with confidence, the dirt hole under the fence smooth as an agate from his furry belly. Spring understands slowness, the way the rabbit and I, only feet apart, squat and sniff the edgeless air. Soon we will be at war, this rabbit and I, battling over the hibiscus and hostas. For now, truce-like, we are statues. Only the tiny hairs inside our ears quiver, listening for summer's tremors. The rabbit and I, like the earth's ripe stamen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paige. That was really beautiful. What a great group of poems you read, and that was a nice variety. Boy, this has been so wonderful. All of you are really good readers, and Diane, you sure know how to pick them. I mean, I'm going to include myself in that immodestly, but I appreciate being published so much by Terrapin and the great support that Diane gives to her poets. She really believes in us in choosing our manuscripts and then in helping us get noticed by the Writer's Almanac and the Slowdown and Verse Daily and those kind of places. So thank you again so much, Diane.
My pleasure.
So
Unfortunately, the Writer's Almanac is no longer going to be a place to get discovered, but we'll find other places.
yeah, at least they have their archives, but I know
Yes.
it's sad that they don't have new ones.
I think so.
So does anyone have any questions then for our group of poets? Or I guess Diane would be willing to answer some questions too.
Sure. Could I say that if you want to hear more poems by these poets or many of our other poets, go to the Terrapin Books websites, terrapinbooks.com, and find the link for the Poetry Salon. And you'll find 10-minute videos there. They're great.
Yes, that was another thing Diane encouraged us to do.
I think people are not unmuted yet.
Oh yeah, people can unmute, and I need to put the view where I can see everybody too, so you can kind of wave if you want to talk, or I think we can manage unmuting and not all talking at once. David's waving his hand.
I had a question for you, Karen. You mentioned this in your introduction, but I'd love to know what your thinking was in concluding the book with those recipes, which I assume are real recipes.
Yeah, well, I thought it would be a little weird to put recipes in the back of a manuscript, but I was brave and I did it, and Diane went along with it. Actually, I didn't have them in the back. I had them, I think when I submitted to her, I had them as section dividers. And it was because I have these poems about the family cooking together, and you know how families, food is so important. And also in the Macedonian tradition, there are just some really unusual recipes. Like I mentioned zelnik in that one poem I read tonight. It's sort of like the Greek spanakopita. It's a phyllo and feta sort of pie. And so I think that was the first one that I thought I need to put the recipe in here. And like I said, Diane went along with it, and it's kind of different. but I think there's 4 recipes in the bag, so it's not like there's a whole lot of them. Kory, I want to say that I loved all of your poems, but I really loved that last one about the date.
Oh.
And you have such a good memory for details. I'm not sure that my memory is as good as yours. What do you jot things down as they come to you, or do you sort of, while you're writing a poem, do you have to sort of rack your brain for specific examples that you want to use?
I think it's a mix of things. I think that if something occurs to me, my husband knows he's not ever safe around me. And really nobody is, because there's just so much good stuff to use. And so sometimes I do try to, make a note or an audio recording to remind myself of some details. But then things that are older, like with family memory, and of course, memories are just so complex and they're not always right. But sometimes my mom's still alive, so I can call my mom, see what she remembers, those sorts of things too. So it's a real mix. But yeah, some things are vivid to me, and I think, I hope maybe always will be. But that poem really is my husband and our first date. So, but that voice, I wish she would come back and relay a whole novel to me, because she's not me. She's somebody else, I think.
I love that voice, and it is fun when a poem starts coming to you in a voice like that. It's just great.
I love too that you mentioned the idea that, memory is not always accurate. And I think that's a great actual freedom in poetry. We don't have to be completely accurate or truthful or anything, because memory is malleable. And we know that each time we tell a story, even if we tweak it a tiny bit, right, that alters our memory. So I think that's just a really fascinating element of the human mind.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. And that reminds me of David in the first poem he read about his mom, Vinegar and Fizz. And yeah, that whole, and I see that with my parents too, especially the older they get. It seems like, some things are just cemented, but then other things have become, they do morph, the stories morph. And the reasons and the morals of the story even sometimes kind of seem to morph. So yeah.
There's a lot of memories for me too that I'm really not sure if I'm remembering it or remembering the story I was told when I was, 8 or 5.
Yes.
And sometimes, I'll say something and then my brother or sister will say, that didn't happen, or I did that, you didn't do that. And yeah, it is very, very malleable. Uh, Karen mentioned the book that essay collection that Kate Sontag and I put together, and it was really all this stuff that poets have to grapple with. How much can you change what really happened when you're writing about family, and the autobiographical element it can be very, very tricky.
Mhm.
I'll tell one anecdote I love. I was at a panel discussion once, and there was a memoirist. I cannot remember her name, but she said, "Oh, because people were asking, does your family ever get angry at you for revealing, family secrets?" And she said, "Oh, if it's anything bad, I have an uncle I made up. And anything negative, Uncle Ralph did it, and he's fiction."
That's good.
The family scapegoat.
Oh,
I love that. I know that my family, my brother in particular, when my book came out, he was like, "Oh, it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird to read about us, And of course, my memories can be different than his. And there's one in particular about his cancer, and I think that's, it was a difficult poem to write, and I think it's probably kind of difficult for him to read too.
mhm.
But actually for AWP for 2022, I'm in a group that's proposing a panel on writing sort of family history and, you know, revealing secrets about your family, or, you know, or even things like abuse or, you know, or addiction or whatever, family griefs and things like that. So hopefully the panel gets selected, but I think it's a good topic. Teresa, were you? Yeah, you raised your hand. Hi,
Yeah.
Teresa.
Hi, how are you? Great,
Great.
great reading. Thank you so much. They were all terrific. So because you all have the same publisher, I just wondered if there was anything interesting or unusual maybe in the way that each of you found your way to Diane's press, to Terrapin Books. I know it wasn't your first book, Diane just published my first book a couple of months ago, you know, and that was a 20-year process that I could talk about, but won't. So I was just curious if, you know, if there was story in any of those processes for you guys about how you found Terrapin, or how Terrapin found you and what that was like.
I would love to answer that. I had sent my book out to many places it was being considered, and I went to AWP 2018, and I was looking to see who is there and who might I talk with. And Diane was doing a panel, and I thought, oh, this will be great. Now I can go listen to her do this panel about being a publisher and a small publisher of poetry books. And I sat in that session and I just thought, oh my gosh, she's my person. I hope she thinks I am her person. Like, I thought this is everything she said was just exactly what I wanted from a publisher. Everything she said, I really believed in as far as the approach to poetry. And she just really seemed to love poetry and love what she was doing. And so afterward, I went up and spoke briefly. I don't even know if you remember, Diane, but I
do remember, I do.
I came up and just spoke briefly with her and said, oh, I submitted my manuscript, and she said, well, what's it called? And at the time it was called Wait. And she said, oh, I remember it. And that's a good sign. And I was like, oh, that's so exciting. And I think it was even, I don't think I had left. It was in Tampa. I don't think I had left. And I got the message that she had accepted it. And I was just thrilled. So that's my publishing and AWP is worth it story. So it's good to go to AWP and meet people face to face and hear what they have to say. And you can get a sense of if your book is a good fit or not.
Mm-hmm. I had a great AWP experience with Diane because she had a reading, an offsite reading for some of the poets, including me, and then she had a reading from her donut anthology. And so I got to be at her table, and the publisher or the editor of Lascaux Review, Stephen Parrish, had published me a couple of times, and he lives in Germany, and he came to the Terrapin table and bought my book, gave me a hug, and then went back and several months later selected a few poems from the book to publish on Lascaux Review's website. So that was a really cool story. But if I may keep talking for a second, I'll also say, because I know Diane likes me to share this story, I had submitted to her my manuscript in another form, and she rejected it the first time, but she gave me some good feedback. And, you know, when you get feedback from an editor, instead of just a flat rejection, like that's a good sign. And so I worked on it and, you know, paid somebody to look at my manuscript and did the things that she suggested. And I emailed her and I said, you know, like, do you want to see this again? And she said, yeah, sure, send it. And then she published it. And she's written a blog about that too. Like, you know, should I resubmit?
So can I tag on that?
Yeah.
Because I read that blog in addition to having, acquired several of Terrapin's books over the years, and I knew I liked what Diane did. And then I read that blog, and then I submitted, and I got a rejection, but it said, "There's much here to admire." And I clung to those words. I was hoping to resubmit in 6 months. I mean, she did say, I'd look at this again. And at 6 months, I thought, I don't know if I've really hit everything, I need to or whatever. So I kept it again. But I think a year later, I submitted. And then, it's just always going to be remembered as the great kitchen dance when I glanced at my phone and you could tell, how you see the first part of the email when on your phone or whatever. And it said yes. And I was like, yes. So, yeah. But yeah, that really did. And I told Diane this when I resubmitted. I said, even if this is still not for you, as you all know, if you're submitting poetry, it can be, really a little discouraging at times, and getting just those hopeful messages from an editor or a publisher, it just means so much. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have quite a few poets now whose manuscripts I've accepted on a second and even a third submission. So
Wow.
one of the questions I'm most often asked is it worth my time and yours for me to resubmit a manuscript, one that you have rejected? And I say, yeah, because I have accepted manuscripts from probably now 8, 9 poets whose manuscripts come to me on a second or a third submission.
I don't know if I have an interesting story, but it is a little odd. I had, partly through my own doings and partly because publishers weren't interested, I had a 17-year gap
Mm,
of not publishing a book. And when I retired, I thought I'd better, get on this and really, put some effort in. And I remembered with dismay that my first book went to 44 publishers
Oh.
before it was finally taken. So I geared myself up, and I was so happy that it did not take 44 submissions. I think it was more like 7 or 8. And, I started getting the rejections from the big presses and so on. And then Diane's reading period opened up, and of course I sent it off. I had known Diane for some time, and of course knew the quality of the press, and she said yes. So here we are.
and happy I did.
We're happy you did too.
Couldn't be more delighted, really, with the product.
Yeah, the books are so beautiful. When I had ordered some before I submitted, because I wanted to see, what does it look like? How does it feel? What's the
Yeah.
cover art? All those things are important to me. Of course, the poems are most important, but you can have beautiful poems in a kind of shoddy looking book that
Mhm.
won't get picked up by people. And I just thought the quality of the books and the cover art was always so stunning. Just a beautiful product.
Oh, thank you.
It's kind of tiny on your screen, but behind me I've put a bunch of the beautiful covers just to serve as my background here.
Yes.
That was
Great.
noticed and appreciated
Yes.
earlier,
Nice,
David.
nice staging, David.
Yes.
Looks great.
Anybody else have any other questions?
I had a question for Kory. I know you have a real interest in Appalachian and old time music,
Yeah.
and you've got that wonderful poem, "Still Won't Marry," about that great song. I love that song, Angeline the Baker.
Mhm.
And I guess I just wanted to hear you talk about your thoughts about music and poetry and their, connections and differences and so on.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. And yeah, I think there's only that one sonnet is in Sugar Fix, but I've got a series of those that are sonnets, which came from my daughter who plays old time music and sings a lot of these. Angeline's a folk, of course, just a folk song, but sometimes they're ballads. And she had brought to my attention, she said, you know, the women don't have voices in so many of these songs. And a lot of times the women are being killed or you know, assaulted, whatever. And so she kind of challenged me to try to take some of this old you know, song ways, if you will, folk ways, and think about them from a different perspective. As far as that, you know, those layers of how we compare songs and poetry, I really think there's so much overlap. And one thing that I always say to people, I mean, I don't know about y'all and the circles that you're in, but here where I am, we've built up a pretty nice poetry community. And yet, you know, the average person, you say poem and they run away from you, right? You know, you do what? And one of the first things that I want people to know is, just like there's every kind of music, there is every kind of poetry, right? And I know several of us run open mics and so forth. And part of that open mic, you know, you're going to listen to every kind of poetry. And I just think that's so important, to embrace all of it, even if it's not all exactly the same thing that I would want to be producing or whatever, but it's the same as with music. So I also think, though, David, to that question of particularly that Appalachian music and the overlap with poetry and story, I mean, I think there's just such a rhythm to the music and to Appalachian diction and storytelling, that there's a real, you know, there's a real mesh there too. And I'm sure that you could argue that for other genres of music and what you're in, you know, enmeshed in. I'm thinking of Karen's book, which I know refers, I'm right, Karen, don't you have you've got some classical music that's in yours. So, you know, it's what you're steeped in, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all. I don't have anything smart to say.
That was very smart. Yeah, I think of Kevin Young has that book. I think it's called Jelly Roll, and he is from jazz and blues, and yeah, definitely from the same tradition, pretty much, rhythm and words and sounds.
Yeah.
Well, I had promised that this would be about an hour, and we started a little after 7, but it's 8:12, and a couple people have dropped off. Somebody said they had to go have dinner and other reasons they had to get off. So I'm just going to wrap this up. Unless anybody has any final words, you can wave at me if you'd like to say something. And I'll just say that this has been really fun, and I'm glad we had this nice talk afterwards, and we had a good audience, and Diane will share the recording. So it's been a great evening. I really appreciate everybody's participation.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thanks for being with us. Yeah, good to see everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, bye, sister.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My husband and I enjoyed this reading and the discussion afterwards.
We're glad to hear it. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trish.
Thank you.
Good night.